Have you ever cared deeply for someone only to feel ignored, pushed away, or emotionally shut out? The more you explain, chase, or beg for understanding, the colder they become. Why? Because avoidant people don't respond to pressure, they respond to strength, calmness, and emotional control. Today, I'm going to share 6 powerful communication shifts that can completely change how an avoidant person sees and treats you without manipulation, drama, or losing your self-respect. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with an avoidant person is chasing them harder the moment they feel distance. The avoidant pulls away, becomes cold, replies less, acts emotionally unavailable, and instead of slowing down, the other person starts over-explaining, over-texting, begging for clarity, and trying to force connection. It feels natural in the moment because when someone we care about becomes distant, our instinct is to hold on tighter. But with avoidant personalities, chasing usually creates the exact opposite result. The more pressure they feel, the more they retreat. That is why the first and most powerful shift is this: stop chasing and start valuing yourself. People often believe love must be proven through sacrifice, constant effort, and emotional pursuit. But self-respect matters more than pursuit. When someone feels that your entire emotional state depends on their attention, they unconsciously stop valuing your presence. Not because you are worthless, but because desperation changes the energy of a relationship. It tells the other person, no matter how you treat me, I will still stay. And once that message becomes clear, respect slowly begins to disappear. Avoidant people are highly sensitive to emotional pressure. They value space, independence, and control over their emotions. So when they sense someone chasing them intensely, they often feel trapped instead of loved. This is why sending 10 paragraphs, demanding immediate reassurance, or constantly asking, "Do you still care about me?" usually pushes them further away. They may stop responding, become defensive, or emotionally shut down completely. But something interesting happens when you stop chasing. When you begin focusing on your own life, your own goals, your own peace, and your own emotional stability, the entire dynamic changes. You stop operating from fear and start operating from confidence. And confidence is powerful. Confidence says, I value this relationship, but I also value myself. It means you can care deeply about someone without abandoning your dignity. Valuing yourself does not mean becoming cold, arrogant, or toxic. It simply means recognizing that your worth is not dependent on another person's validation. It means understanding that you should not have to beg for basic respect, communication, or effort. A healthy connection should never require you to constantly prove that you deserve love. Think about it carefully. The people who command the most respect are usually not the loudest, neediest, or most emotionally reactive. They are the people who carry themselves with calm confidence. They know their value even when nobody is praising them. They do not panic when someone pulls away because they understand that their identity is bigger than one relationship. That kind of energy changes how people treat you. When an avoidant person sees that you are no longer chasing them desperately, they often begin to pay attention differently. Suddenly, your silence feels noticeable. Your absence feels real. Your calmness feels strong. Why? Because only secure behavior creates curiosity and respect. It shows that you are not trying to control anyone. You are simply unwilling to lose yourself while trying to keep someone else. This is where many people get confused. They think stopping the chase is a game or manipulation. It is not. The goal is not to punish the avoidant person or make them jealous. The goal is to reconnect with your own self-worth. There is a huge difference between pretending not to care and genuinely respecting yourself enough to stop overextending for someone who gives little in return. Real self-value changes your behavior naturally. You stop sending messages just to get attention. You stop tolerating disrespect because you are afraid of losing someone. You stop shrinking yourself to make another person comfortable. Instead, you begin investing your energy into growth, purpose, health, friendships, and peace of mind. And ironically, that is often when people begin respecting you more, because people are drawn toward emotional strength. An avoidant person may not always express emotions openly, but they observe behavior carefully. They notice who becomes emotionally unstable under pressure and who remain grounded. When they see someone who can remain calm, maintain standards, they are confident in their abilities, and continue living a full life without begging for validation, it creates a different level of respect. At the end of the day, chasing someone cannot force love, loyalty, or respect. Real respect begins the moment you decide that your value is not up for negotiation. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do in any relationship is not to run after someone who keeps creating distance, but to stand still, value yourself, and let your actions say, I deserve mutual effort, mutual respect, and a connection that does not require me to abandon myself. One of the most important skills you can develop when dealing with an avoidant person is learning how to communicate calmly instead of emotionally. This does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending that nothing hurts you. It means understanding that the way you deliver your emotions often determines whether the conversation creates connection or distance. With avoidant personalities especially, emotional intensity can feel overwhelming very quickly. The louder the emotion becomes, the faster they tend to shut down. Many people believe that if they experience their pain more strongly, the other person will finally understand how serious the issue is. So they raise their voice, repeat the same points again and again, send long emotional messages, or react impulsively out of frustration. But avoidants often interpret emotional pressure differently. Instead of hearing the message, they focus on escaping the intensity. Their mind shifts from how can I solve this to how can I get away from this conversation. That is why calm communication is powerful. Calmness is not weakness. In fact, it requires far more strength than emotional outbursts. Anyone can react in anger when hurt, but staying composed while expressing disappointment takes emotional maturity. It shows self-control, confidence, and inner stability. And these are qualities that naturally create respect. Imagine two different situations. In the first situation, someone says, "You never care about me. You always ignore me. I'm tired of this." The words may come from real pain, but the emotional intensity immediately creates tension. An avoidant person hearing this may become defensive, silent, or emotionally distant because they feel attacked. Now compare that to someone calm. Lie saying, "I feel disconnected when communication disappears for days. I want a relationship where both people communicate respectfully." The message is still honest. The boundary is still clear. But the delivery feels grounded instead of explosive. Calm communication gives the other person room to listen instead of only reacting. This is important because avoidants often struggle with emotional confrontation. Deep emotions can make them uncomfortable, especially when conversations become unpredictable or highly charged. When discussions feel emotionally unsafe, they may shut down completely, avoid responding, or disappear emotionally. That does not mean your feelings are invalid. It simply means that emotional chaos rarely leads to productive communication with someone who already fears emotional pressure. Speaking calmly also protects your own dignity. When people become overwhelmed emotionally, they sometimes say things they later regret. They may insult, threaten, beg, or lose control trying to force a response. In those moments, the focus shifts away from the actual issue and toward the emotional reaction itself. Instead of discussing respect, communication, or accountability, the entire conversation becomes about the argument. Calmness prevents that loss of control. There is something powerful about a person who can express pain without becoming destructive. A calm voice carries authority. It sends the message, "I know what I deserve, and I do not need to scream to prove my worth." That kind of emotional control often creates more impact than anger ever could. Another reason calm communication matters is because avoidants tend to observe emotional patterns carefully. If every difficult conversation turns into panic, chaos, or emotional overload, they may begin associating closeness with stress. Over time, this increases their urge to withdraw. But when communication feels steady and respectful, they are more likely to remain engaged instead of escaping. This does not mean you should become emotionless. Healthy communication includes honesty, vulnerability, and openness. The goal is not to hide your emotions, but to express them in a balanced way. You can still say, "That hurt me." You can still say, "I need more consistency." you can still express disappointment. The difference is that you speak from clarity instead of emotional desperation. One of the strongest phrases you can use is, "I'm willing to talk when we can both communicate respectfully." That sentence changes everything. It does not attack, beg, or manipulate. It sets a calm standard. It shows that you are open to connection, but not at the cost of emotional chaos or disrespect. People often underestimate the power of emotional control. They think strength means dominating a conversation or winning an argument. But real strength is staying grounded, even when emotions are high. Real strength is being able to pause instead of reacting impulsively. Real strength is communicating your standards without losing yourself in anger. And the truth is, calmness changes how people see you. A person who remains emotionally balanced during conflict appears more confident, more mature, and more self-respecting. Avoidants may not respond immediately, but they notice that energy. They notice when someone stops reacting from panic and starts speaking from certainty. At the end of the day, emotional explosions rarely create lasting respect. They may create temporary guilt, fear, or tension, but not respect. Respect grows when communication reflects self-control, clarity, and confidence. The calmer you become, the more powerful your words become. Because when your emotions are controlled, every sentence carries intention instead of desperation. One of the clearest signs of self-respect in any relationship is the ability to set boundaries. Without boundaries, people slowly begin accepting behavior that damages their confidence, peace, and emotional well-being. And when it comes to avoidant personalities, boundaries become even more important because avoidants often test emotional limits without realizing it. They may disappear during conflict, avoid important conversations, give inconsistent effort, or expect closeness only on their terms. If there are no clear boundaries, the relationship can become emotionally exhausting very quickly. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are about controlling another person, punishing them, or creating emotional distance. But healthy boundaries are not about controlling others at all. They are about protecting your own emotional health and teaching people how to treat you. A boundary simply says, "This is what I can accept, and this is what I cannot continue tolerating." That distinction matters. When one constantly accepts disrespect, mixed signals, neglect, or emotional inconsistency without consequences, they unintentionally teach the other person that the behavior is acceptable. Over time, disrespect becomes normalized. Not because the avoidant person is necessarily cruel, but because human beings naturally repeat behaviors that are tolerated. This is why boundaries are essential for maintaining respect in any relationship. For example, imagine someone disappears for days every time conflict appears, then returns acting as if nothing happened. If the other person immediately welcomes them back without addressing the issue, the pattern continues. The silence becomes normal. The emotional avoidance becomes expected. But when someone calmly says, "I understand needing space, but disappearing without communication is not healthy for me," they introduce accountability into the relationship. Boundaries create clarity. Avoidants often struggle with emotional closeness and difficult conversations, but that does not mean you should abandon your own needs to keep the relationship alive. Many people become so afraid of losing an avoidant partner that they stop expressing standards altogether. They tolerate behaviors they know are unhealthy because they fear that speaking up will push the person away. But sacrificing your standards for temporary connection usually leads to resentment, anxiety, and emotional imbalance. Real respect cannot grow where fear controls your behavior. A strong boundary does not come from anger. It comes from certainty. There is a huge difference between saying, "If you leave, I'm done forever," in emotional frustration, and calmly saying, "I want mutual respect and communication in this relationship." One comes from emotional reaction. The other comes from self-worth. That calm certainty is powerful because it changes the energy of the relationship. Instead of constantly trying to earn respect, you begin expecting it naturally. You stop negotiating basic decency. You stop accepting behaviors that repeatedly damage your peace. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself just to keep someone comfortable. Many people struggle with boundaries because they confuse kindness with self-sacrifice. They think being understanding means tolerating everything, but healthy relationships require both compassion and standards. You can understand someone's emotional struggles without allowing those struggles to become an excuse for disrespect. For instance, an avoidant person may genuinely need time alone to process emotions. That is understandable. But there is a difference between healthy space and complete emotional neglect. Boundaries help define that difference. They allow you to respect another person's emotional style while still honoring your own emotional needs. Another important truth is this: boundaries reveal who is willing to respect you. When you begin setting limits, some people respond positively. They communicate better, become more aware of their behavior, and show greater effort. Others may resist because they benefited from the lack of boundaries before. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to prioritizing other people's comfort over your own needs. But discomfort is often part of growth. The reality is that people are more likely to respect someone who respects themselves. When you communicate standards calmly and consistently, you show emotional maturity. You show that your presence in the relationship is valuable. You show that love does not mean unlimited access to your pad. Even while your needs are ignored, one of the most powerful phrases you can say is, "I care about this relationship, but I will not accept disrespect." That sentence carries both compassion and strength. It does not attack the other person. It does not create unnecessary drama. It simply establishes a standard. And standards matter because relationships without boundaries slowly destroy emotional stability. Without boundaries, people become emotionally drained, trying to please someone who gives inconsistent effort. They become trapped in cycles of anxiety, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion. But boundaries interrupt those cycles. They remind you that your emotional well-being matters too. At the end of the day, boundaries are not walls designed to keep people out. They are filters that protect healthy connection and expose unhealthy patterns. They help create relationships built on mutual respect instead of fear, imbalance, or emotional chasing. And the moment you begin honoring your own standards consistently, people start understanding that your kindness is genuine, but your self-respect is non-negotiable. One of the fastest ways to lose yourself in a relationship with an avoidant person is to begin begging for attention, affection, or reassurance. At first, it may not even feel like begging. It can look innocent double texting, constantly checking if they are upset, trying harder every time they become distant, or seeking validation just to feel emotionally secure. But over time, this pattern creates an unhealthy imbalance where one person is constantly chasing emotional connection while the other controls the emotional distance. The painful truth is that attention given freely feels completely different from attention forced through desperation. When someone feels pressured to constantly reassure, respond, or prove their feelings, the relationship begins to feel emotionally heavy. And avoidant personalities, who already struggle with emotional pressure, often pull away even more when they sense neediness or dependency. That is why one of the most powerful things you can do is stop begging for attention and start investing your energy back into yourself. Many people fall into the trap of making another person the center of their emotional world. Their mood depends on whether they received a text. Their confidence depends on how much attention they get at that day. Their peace disappears the moment communication changes. This emotional dependence creates anxiety because your emotional stability is now controlled by someone else's behavior. And avoidants notice this dynamic quickly. Avoidant individuals often respect emotional independence more than emotional pursuit. They are naturally drawn toward people who have their own purpose, confidence, and identity outside the relationship, not because they dislike love, but because emotional independence feels safer and less overwhelming to them. When someone appears emotionally consumed by the relationship, avoidants may begin feeling trapped or responsible for emotions they do not know how to manage. This is why constantly seeking reassurance often backfires. Questions like, "Do you still love me?" or "Why are you acting different?" may come from fear and insecurity, but repeated too often, they create pressure instead of connection. Over time, the relationship becomes centered around emotional reassurance rather than genuine connection. But something changes when you stop seeking validation from another person. When you focus on your own life, again your goals, your health, your passion, your friendships, your pace, you slowly rebuild your emotional balance. You remember that your value existed before the relationship and will continue existing regardless of someone's attention. This shift is powerful because it changes your energy completely. Instead of waiting anxiously for someone to choose you every day, you begin choosing yourself. That does not mean becoming cold or pretending you do not care. It means understanding that healthy love should complement your life, not consume your identity. A relationship should add to your happiness, not become the only source of it. The moment your entire self-worth depends on another person's attention, fear begins controlling your behavior. Fear makes people overgive. Fear makes people tolerate disrespect. Fear makes people abandon their standards just to avoid losing someone. And ironically, the more desperate someone becomes for attention, the less attractive their energy often feels. Confidence works differently. Confidence says, I value this relationship, but I also value myself. It creates emotional balance because your life continues moving forward, whether someone texts you immediately or not. You continue growing. Energy, learning, building, and living fully. That energy naturally creates respect because it shows emotional stability. There is also a deeper reason why avoidants often respond better to independence than desperation. Avoidants usually fear emotional engulfment, the feeling of losing freedom or being emotionally overwhelmed. So when someone constantly seeks reassurance or attention, avoidants may experience it as pressure, even if that was never the intention. But when someone remains emotionally grounded and independent, the connection feels safer and more balanced. This is why silence, space, and personal growth can sometimes communicate more strength than emotional chasing ever could. Think about the people who leave the strongest impression in life. They are rarely the people constantly demanding validation. They are usually people who carry quiet confidence, people who know their worth without needing constant approval, people who can love deeply without losing themselves completely. That kind of emotional independence changes relationship dynamics. It removes desperation and replaces it with calm self-respect. Instead of saying, please choose me, your energy begins saying, I know my value whether you choose me or not. And that shift is transformative. One of the strongest truths you can remember is this: attention gained through begging rarely feels secure. Even if someone responds temporarily, the anxiety remains because the connection was built on fear of losing them. But when attention comes naturally through mutual respect, emotional balance, and genuine effort, it feels peaceful instead of exhausting. At the end of the day, the strongest person in any relationship is not the one who begs hardest for love. It is the person who can love fully while still maintaining their dignity, purpose, and self-worth. Because when you stop chasing validation and start building a life that fulfills you independently, people begin seeing you differently. Your presence feels calmer, stronger, and more valuable, not because you demanded attention, but because you stopped needing it to define your worth. One of the most misunderstood forms of communication in relationships is silence. Many people think silence always means weakness, avoidance, or emotional games. But in reality, silence can be one of the strongest responses when used with maturity and self-control. Especially when dealing with avoidant personalities, learning when to stop arguing, stop over-explaining, and stop reacting emotionally can completely change the dynamic of the relationship. Most people respond to disrespect immediately. They feel ignored, dismissed, or hurt, and their first instinct is to react. They send long emotional messages, demand explanations, argue repeatedly, or try desperately to make the other person understand their pain. But the more emotionally reactive the situation becomes, the more avoidant individuals often retreat. Instead of creating understanding, constant emotional pressure can create emotional exhaustion. This is where silence becomes powerful. Silence is not about manipulation. It is not about punishing someone by ignoring them or trying to make them jealous. Healthy silence is about emotional control. It is the ability to pause instead of reacting impulsively. It is choosing dignity over emotional chaos. Sometimes the strongest response is not another argument, but the confidence to stop feeding unhealthy behavior with endless reactions. Avoidant people are often highly uncomfortable with emotional intensity when conversations become overwhelming. They may shut down, withdraw, or emotionally disconnect. If one person continues chasing the conversation aggressively while the avoidant person keeps pulling away, the conversation becomes more and more strained. The relationship can become trapped in a cycle of pursuit and distance. One side keeps demanding engagement, while the other keeps escaping pressure. Silence interrupts that cycle. When you stop reacting immediately to every cold response, every delayed message, or every moment of emotional distance, something important happens. You regain emotional power over yourself. Instead of your emotions controlling your behavior, you begin controlling your emotions. And that shift changes everything. Many people fear silence because they think, if I stop talking, they will forget about me. But constantly over-explaining yourself does not guarantee respect, understanding, or closeness either. In fact, too much emotional chasing can sometimes reduce your words' impact. When every moment becomes an emotional reaction, your communication loses calmness and clarity. Silence creates space. Space allows emotions to settle. Space allows reflection. Space allows people to feel the consequences of emotional distance without being forced into confrontation. Sometimes an avoidant person only begins reflecting on the relationship when the emotional noise disappears. As long as someone keeps chasing, explaining, and demanding, the avoidant may stay focused on escaping pressure instead of examining their own behavior. This does not mean silence will magically fix every relationship. It simply means that not every situation improves through more words. Some situations improve when you stop arguing and start observing, when you stop forcing understanding and start protecting your peace. There is tremendous strength in being able to say, I've expressed myself clearly. The rest is your choice. That sentence reflects emotional maturity because it recognizes an important truth. You cannot force another person to communicate, care, or change. You can only control your own standards and responses. Silence also protects your dignity. When emotions are high, people often say things they later regret. They may insult, beg, threaten, or repeatedly seek reassurance out of fear. These reactions usually come from pain, but they often leave people feeling emotionally drained and embarrassed afterward. Silence gives you time to regain clarity before responding emotionally. It prevents temporary emotions from controlling permanent actions. Another important truth is that silence reveals patterns clearly. When you stop chasing communication, you begin seeing who genuinely values the connection enough to maintain effort naturally. Some people only participate in relationships when the other person does all the emotional work. Silence exposes that imbalance. It helps you see whether the relationship is built on mutual effort or emotional dependency. Avoidants especially notice silence differently. Because they are used to emotional pursuit and pressure, calm distance can feel unfamiliar and impactful. When someone remains composed instead of reactive, it often creates more respect than emotional arguments ever could. Calm silence communicates self-control. It says, I will not fight for basic respect endlessly. That energy changes the emotional atmosphere completely. However, it is important to understand the difference between mature silence and emotional manipulation. Silent treatment used to punish, control, or emotionally hurt someone is unhealthy, but intentional silence used to maintain peace, reguide, and emotional balance, and avoid destructive reactions is completely different. One comes from emotional immaturity, the other comes from self-awareness. Sometimes silence is necessary because not every person is ready to hear your truth in the moment. Some conversations become productive only after emotions settle. Some people understand your value only after your constant availability disappears. And sometimes silence helps you realize that your energy has been wasted trying to convince someone to give what they were never willing to offer consistently. At the end of the day, silence is powerful because it reflects confidence. It shows that you do not need to argue endlessly to prove your worth. It shows emotional discipline. And most importantly, it reminds both you and the other person that your peace matters too. Because not every disrespect deserves a dramatic reaction. Sometimes the strongest response is calm distance, clear standards, and the quiet confidence to walk away from unhealthy behavior without losing your self-respect in the process. One of the deepest reasons people stay trapped in unhealthy relationships with avoidant individuals is fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being replaced, fear of losing the person they invested so much emotion into. This fear quietly controls behavior in ways many people do not even realize. It makes them tolerate disrespect, ignore red flags, overextend emotionally, and accept less than they deserve, simply because they cannot imagine losing the relationship. But the moment you begin choosing self-respect over fear, everything changes. Fear creates emotional dependence. When someone becomes afraid of losing another person at all costs, they slowly stop acting like themselves. They begin walking on eggshells, avoiding honest conversations, and sacrificing their standards just to keep the connection alive. Instead of asking, "Is this relationship healthy for me?" they become obsessed with asking, "How do I stop them from leaving?" And that mindset is dangerous because it gives away emotional power. Avoidant personalities often sense when someone fears losing them deeply. Even if they never say it out loud, the energy becomes obvious through behavior: constant reassurance seeking, over-explaining, tolerating neglect, and staying silent about disrespect out of fear of conflict. Over time, this imbalance weakens the relationship because respect cannot grow where one person abandons themselves to maintain connection. Self-respect changes that dynamic completely. Self-respect means understanding that your worth does not disappear because one person cannot fully meet your emotional needs. It means recognizing that no relationship should require you to betray your own dignity, peace, or emotional stability. And most importantly, it means accepting a difficult but powerful truth. You cannot control whether someone stays, but you can control how you allow yourself to be treated. That realization is freeing. Many people spend months or even years trying to become good enough for someone emotionally unavailable. They believe that if they love harder, become more patient, ask for less, or tolerate more pain, the avoidant person will finally change. But relationships built on fear rarely become healthy because fear constantly demands self-sacrifice. When fear controls you, every disagreement feels terrifying. Every delayed message creates anxiety. Every moment of emotional distance feels like potential abandonment. You stop feeling secure because your emotional world depends entirely on another person's choices. And that emotional instability slowly drains your confidence. But self-respect creates emotional stability. When you truly value yourself, you stop seeing relationships as something you must cling to for survival. You begin understanding that while love is meaningful, your identity is bigger than one person's approval. You realize that being alone temporarily is far less damaging than staying in a relationship where your self-worth is constantly shrinking. This mindset is powerful because it removes desperation, and desperation changes how people treat you. When someone feels that you will tolerate anything just to keep them, they often stop appreciating your presence fully. Not always intentionally, but because human beings naturally value what appears emotionally secure and grounded. Confidence creates respect, fear weakens it. Avoidants especially tend to respect emotional independence. When they sense someone no longer acting from panic or emotional dependency, the relationship dynamic often shifts. Calm confidence feels different from fear-based attachment. It communicates strength instead of emotional pressure. That does not mean becoming cold or pretending not to care. It means caring without losing yourself. It means being able to say, "I love you, but I will not abandon my standards, peace, or dignity to keep this relationship." That kind of self-respect is rare, and it changes the energy of every interaction. One of the strongest moments in personal growth happens when you realize that losing someone is not the end of your value. Many people stay trapped because they believe losing the relationship means losing happiness itself. But your worth existed before this connection, and it will continue existing after it. Relationships should add to your life, not become the foundation of your identity. This is why confidence becomes magnetic. A person who no longer fears abandonment carries themselves differently. They communicate more clearly. They stop tolerating inconsistency. They stop begging for effort. They stop chasing people who repeatedly create emotional confusion. Instead, they focus on maintaining their own peace and standards. And ironically, this is often when people begin respecting them more. Because emotional strength is attractive, not fake toughness, not arrogance. Real emotional strength, the kind that allows someone to ove deeply without becoming emotionally dependent on another person's approval. The kind that says, I want this connection, but I will survive even if it ends. That mindset changes relationships because it removes fear from your decisions. You no longer stay silent about disrespect just to avoid conflict. You no longer accept crumbs because you are terrified of being alone. You stop viewing love as something you must earn through suffering. At the end of the day, self-respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship. Without it, fear controls your choices. But when you finally choose dignity over desperation, peace over emotional chaos, and confidence over fear of loss, people begin seeing you differently. Because the moment you stop fearing abandonment is the moment your value becomes impossible to ignore.